Taos in Baltimore for the Ravens to take on the Miami Dolphins. And we interrupt this regularly scheduled programming of complaining about the Ravens and the horrific ways that they've lost games here lately and their injuries and woes, and take a break to say one little happy thing. The New York Yankees are not in the 2017 World Series. I got a guy here that is probably pretty happy about that. I know this this World Series rings back to me 1980, in the fall of 1980, and Jose Cruz and those flashy Astros uniforms. This is weird, Astros, Dodgers in a World Series. Alan, have we finally come to grips with the fact that the Houston Astros are in the American League?
I've been used to it for a while. I mean, it's just as weird as to see the Milwaukee Brewers playing in the National League, right? So, I mean,
fair enough.
Two teams basically just flip-flopped. So, it hasn't been a long time, but it's been a few years. So, they've been building it as long-time division rivals now in the World Series. But, the funny thing, and, I talked about the Diamondbacks and the Indians when last we spoke, and those were really the two hottest teams. And what has happened is what we haven't seen much in baseball in the last, 15, 20 years, where the two teams that were consistently the best throughout the season have actually made it to the World Series. The Dodgers had an epic run for a good little while. Astros were tearing it up through the first half. Both of them had a swoon towards the end of the season. But if you look at it, I mean, they really were both the two best teams in their league. The Yankees certainly gave them the Astros a little bit of a scare, but other than that, I mean, the Dodgers have had a relatively smooth run through the postseason, and they're going to get their biggest challenge coming up.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything to dislike about this. I mean, there was a great, epic 7-game series with the New York Yankees taking on the upstart Astros, all these young stars. I mean, impossible to hate on Altuve, right? I mean, I think it's impossible to not like the Astros. They were kind of plucky. I don't know that anybody was feeling real good about them on Thursday or Friday. Now, were we, Alan?
I was certainly concerned. I mean, that the Yankees, who, look, clearly they have talent, and they're a team that maybe arrived a little ahead of schedule, but they were not expected to go that deep into the postseason. I think the sort of that Yankee mystique, looking at the pinstripes, but more importantly, the Yankees play to their stadium. I mean, first of all, it's an adversarial place in the postseason. I think we all know that. And in the short porch in right field, I mean, it just, the pop-ups that go there for home runs, you think Camden Yards is small. Watch a ball go out in right field in New Yankee Stadium. And I think that really helped keep them alive through a lot of this. The sort of fear of the home run and the success of it. But they only won one game on the road. And the Astros were a team where, if it was the battle of who's more confident as a young club, the Astros have been putting this together for a little while. I mean, you mentioned Jose Altuve, and you always have the question of who would you go have to get the base hit you need to keep yourself alive, right? Well, in today's baseball, if I needed somebody to get me a hit to keep me alive, Jose Altuve would be that guy. He's just an incredibly talented guy, and he's impossible not to like, because you look at the pictures of him standing next to Aaron Judge, and he's a dwarf, basically. And he's certainly more like the average guy off the street in terms of how he's built. You can certainly relate to him more. I know I can.
I had this Freddie Patek thing going on with him from my childhood when, I was as tall as Freddie Patek. That was kind of fun. I mean, Altuve, he's Venezuelan. What's not to like about Jose Altuve, right?
Absolutely. I will say the one thing, all the teams that I sort of quietly rooted to not have get in, they've gone out at this point. The Yankees were the last one. I don't really have a dog in the fight about the Astros, but I will say that, they're, as much as they've taken time to build this thing and they've done it, they certainly were caught cheating at a point that certainly leaves a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth. It's not like steroids or anything like that, but they did not go into this World Series completely unblemished, given the email and hacking scandal they had a few years back. So they did put this together a little questionably, but in terms of the individual guys on the club, I have great respect for Justin Verlander. We've talked about Jose Altuve. Carlos Correa is, the young Manny Machado-like stud that has carried himself very well. And there are a lot of guys in that club that seem to play with the kind of joy you would like to see on any baseball team. So, in terms of rooting for it, at this point, I just want to see a really good series.
You know what? You mentioned Verlander. That's the wild card in all this, right? Like, this would be where the Oriole fan and you would say they get Verlander and go to the World Series, and the Orioles get Hellickson, right? I mean, it's
right.
Wade Miley, right? Or
right.
I guess we could go back to Bob Horner and Keith Moreland and Craig Lefferts and Lonnie Smith and Kevin Bass, and I mean, I could go through this again and again.
The biggest run was Andrew Miller in 2014. That was the biggest piece that I can think of.
That mattered. That worked.
That really mattered. Which is why when we talk about the players that the Orioles have let go for no reason, particularly in the Duquette era, I do not include Rodriguez in that because I thought that was the legit trade. It made sense. And even, quite frankly, letting him go, I was sort of on board with that because Andrew Miller had sort of emerged, and we hadn't seen him be that elite for that long, and you weren't sure giving him that kind of money. So I sort of understood that, but, talk about the Gerardo Parras and giving up Jake Arrieta and, the kind of things that they've done in the last few years. That's the one really questionable move that people refer to that I do not bring up because I think Andrew Miller was exactly what that club needed.
Well, in the case of Verlander, this turned out to be a stroke of genius, and, he has been routinely thought of as on the other side the last 2 or 3 years, right? Like, that he wasn't the same as he used to be. Certainly he's gone into the Wayback Machine here the last couple weeks now, hasn't he?
I'll tell you what, right, the last 2 or 3 seasons, and you think back to 2014 when the Orioles faced Price and Verlander and I'm trying to think of the third Cy Young Award winner on the Tigers that they beat.
Pfister was a part of that for 5 minutes, and Scherzer, right?
Scherzer, thank you. Yeah. Right. Matt Scherzer, Price, and Verlander, and the Orioles went through them to get to the ALCS against the Royals. So, I mean, at that point, Verlander was starting to look like he was on the downside, and you could see him over the last couple of seasons trying to figure it out, struggling. But he seemed to find it again this year, not so much in being the young power pitcher that he was, but somewhere across between maybe a little diminished velocity, but becoming more of a pitcher in the process. And he certainly took off in the late part of the season in September and through this run. So, I mean, he was exactly the stroke of genius that they needed to have to get them through it. Frankly, I mean, as the ALCS MVP, I don't think that they could have gotten past the Yankees without his 2 spectacular performances. So, and Verlander's always, he carries himself well. He seems to be pretty honest. He wants the ball. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, you look at so many guys in baseball that they don't go 9 innings anymore, or they don't. They're happy to walk away from a situation and give it to the bullpen. And Verlander's one of those guys. There's still a few left, and he's certainly one of them that wants the ball. You could see it when they were losing the 5th game in Yankee Stadium with Keuchel on the mound, and they showed him a couple times in the dugout, particularly towards the end. And there's a look on some pitchers' faces in that instance, and you can sort of see, are they scared or are they ready? And maybe it's cliche, but Verlander certainly had that look like, I'm ready for it, let's go get him. And he carried that out there in Game 6. I mean, it's certainly hard to root against him at this point.
I get the feeling this thing's going to go 6 or 7, right? I mean, I think we're going to get some good pitching on both sides. Certainly, as you pointed out, the 2 best teams for most of the year. No disrespect at all to the Indians and what they did, or even the Nationals. And we can get to the Nationals and the Red Sox and the drama that comes out of this, but I do want to talk a little bit about the Dodgers and the Flair and Puig and Kershaw being rested and the kind of pitching they've had. And they've had a pretty nice little trip here in October so far.
And the weird thing is that the Dodgers, of all the clubs, the Dodgers are the club that always seem to do it with guys out of their farm system. I mean, they just reload. And you look at the, Bellinger and Kershaw and, name me a guy, either shrewd deals with Friedman, who came over from the Rays, who's certainly made a few in the last couple of seasons, or just the frontline farm talent that they develop And even guys that haven't panned out exactly the way you would think, they found a way to get the most out of them with platoons and using the versatile bench, which you certainly need coming out of the National League.
And they hired a great manager, a guy who really sort of gets this. A little bit of a savant, I think, in the same way that I think that about Girardi and, a couple of the other guys that just sort of went from being a player to being a manager and doing it pretty well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Roberts, certainly, it's funny, he certainly wasn't a star in his day, but he was always the guy, he was a spark plug. Stealing a base, find a way to hit the ball to the other side to get a guy over. So certainly a player that I think that people respected, knew how to play the game, probably spent a lot of time next to coaches on the bench. But not only that, I mean, you've heard a lot of discussion. I heard Ron Darling talk about the differences in the game today as opposed to when he played. And he talked about how good managers back in the day, a good year was if you never talked to the manager or the general manager, because it meant that you weren't a problem. You were having a good season. You're going about your business, and they're leaving you alone. And today's player, you're sitting in the office. You're talking about what's going on with your family. You're talking about what's happening. You want your manager to know you and talk to you. And Dave Roberts seems to be a guy who not only understands the nuances of the game on the field, but can relate to his players and can get some things out of them. And, I mean, we certainly know Yasiel Puig has been, his own soap opera in Los Angeles since he came up. And while he certainly isn't drama-free anymore, he certainly seems to be more grounded, and I use that term loosely, than he's been in previous seasons. If you look at the numbers he put up this year, he had a really nice season, really provided with Justin Turner a right-handed bat amongst a lot of left-handed bats, and has been a good player for this club and done fairly well in the postseason. So, I mean, you certainly credit that to Dave Roberts, nursing the period through where they didn't have Clayton Kershaw, or before they went out and got players to help augment them, whether it be Curtis Granderson or Yu Darvish, down for the
Well, the Darvish trade's another one, right? I mean, that's another thing they did at the trading deadline, to not go get a guy, to go get a guy that they felt could be, and I don't know that anybody thinks that Darvish is a one. I'm not getting crazy, and he certainly has been out of the rotation as much as in it in Texas, but, he's a guy I would love to see in an Oriole uniform. He'd have been an upgrade over anything we had around here. That's for damn sure.
Darvish is a one talent, and I don't know that he, we were talking about Bundy and Gausman, and I mentioned to you before, if they hadn't been the number one guy on a team, that their seasons would have not only been better, but probably looked better. And I remember Mark Messina talking a lot about why it was good for Mike to go to the Yankees, that, when you're in a rotation with Roger Clemens, who is one of the all-time greats, and Andy Pettitte, who is looked upon as an all-time great Yankee, that Mike could just go there and pitch, it really helped him. So you're a guy like Yu Darvish, where they spend all the money to get you there, and they're looking at you to be the great white the great Asian savior, I guess, and where you can go to Los Angeles, and nobody's looking at you to be that, because one of the greatest left-handed pitchers the planet has ever seen is taking the ball as the number one guy. It takes a lot of pressure off of pitchers. It just really does, and I certainly think that's a good fit for him. Because he has all the talent in the world, and if he doesn't have to be looked upon as the savior for a rotation, all he has to do is go and pitch, and that's a club where that really makes sense for him. So, sometimes it's not just about what the talent is; it's also about how does he fit. And Freeman went out and found a guy to do it. And then again, whether or not, I don't know anything about the prospects that they traded to get him, but the Dodgers organization certainly has the kind of reputation that will buy them the kind of gravitas required to get a player like Yu Darvish, and they have the money to back it up. So it was certainly a great fit, and he certainly showed up for them in the postseason so far. And they're going to have all they can handle when they play the Astros, whether it be Kershaw or Darvish on the mound.
Keuchel Kershaw, right? I mean, this thing is really set up. Verlander, Hill, we're getting the best of both of these. And on top of that, Alan, and this will not be lost, I think, on fans who watch baseball this time of the year and appreciate global warming and all that our government is doing to heat up the planet. We're going to have good weather. I mean, this is not going to be Boston 34 degrees, huddled masses, Chicago and the wind blowing in and the rain and all the goofiness with the Phillies and, the bad weather World Series. This is going to be like daylight in LA, sun setting, beautiful vistas, good baseball weather, that's going to happen here this week, and everyone's healthy, pitching matchup. This is a nice little dream series if you're a baseball nerd to sit down, because I don't really know who's going to win this thing. I don't know that I really feel a favorite in this, given the way the Astros came back on the Yankees, and I think really showed a lot of people that they're serious about this thing.
No question. Yeah, it's funny, about the weather, because you're right. Both in Los Angeles and Houston, you're looking at places where I think I heard it's going to be in the 90s in Los Angeles on Tuesday, which is just bizarre. And in Houston, even if the weather were bad, they could just close the dome on the stadium. But, the flip side of that is that you have wildfires going on in California, and Houston's trying to recover from horrible, century epic type of weather. So both of these places, while the weather should be good for the series, have not escaped the non-existent global warming that we're not experiencing right now in the world. But yeah, it should be fun, because it's not going to be a situation like you remember in Philadelphia where they had to postpone games because it was cold and wet, and they passed the rule that a World Series game cannot finish short because of bad weather. You would certainly not expect to see that happen. I certainly can't tell you who's going to win the World Series, but I would say I would probably give the edge to the Dodgers, simply because their bullpen is probably stronger than the Astros. We saw some cracks in the Astros bullpen in the series, particularly in the series against the Yankees, and the Dodgers have had a lot of time to sit on it. So they're, unless they suffer from rust, and I don't think that's probably likely, I would give a slight edge to the Dodgers, but. There's certainly no question that the pure raw talent from the position players in this World Series is going to be really impressive, and certainly the tops of the rotations on both parts, you're going to see the best that the game really has to offer right now.
All right, man, so heads have been rolling over the weekend, right? From Boston to Washington, the teams that almost got there, that didn't get there. Now the Red Sox going to hire Cora, and the Nationals and Dusty Baker. Boy, the Nationals are really a poorly run organization for one that has had some success, right? Like those clowns that own that place that are waiting to get this $300 million check from Angelos at some point, they might get it. They really don't have a real grip on what's going on down there, do they?
It's a weird organization. Certainly, you look at the managerial choices they've made. You go from Matt Williams, who certainly seemed to be sort of the disciplinarian, authoritarian type that just didn't go well at all with that team. And the epitaph on his tenure as manager is Jason Worth saying to him, "When was it that you knew that you lost this clubhouse?" To Dusty Baker, who I have to say, Dusty Baker has gotten the most raw deal in every place he's ever been. You look at his managerial record, all he's ever done is win, period. San Francisco, Chicago, Cincinnati, all those teams have ever done are win. And the first back-to-back division titles for the Nationals came with Dusty. Obviously, they're an incredibly talented club. But he was exactly the manager that they needed, and kept it loose and kept those guys together. And
after they were choking each other in the dugout the year before,
right,
you might want to point out.
Exactly. And I got to tell you, you look at the clubs after he's gone, you look at the records of those teams, all those teams after he's left, and they go down fast. Now, is that going to be the case in Washington where they have a ton of talent? Maybe not. But we'll see what happens if Bryce leaves after the coming season. The story for the Nationals is simple. They have suffered a lot from the Detroit Tigers of the last few years in the sense that they've put together fantastic rotations, and their bullpen has been suspect. They did some things this year to improve it late, but even then it wasn't great. They had a couple guys that were injured that didn't help them going forward in the postseason. Bryce Harper coming back from an injury clearly wasn't exactly the player he'd been. And in general, one of the best offenses in baseball just didn't hit against the Cubs. What that reason is, I don't know, but I don't know that you can blame Dusty Baker for it. And in Game 5, some of the most bizarre things that anyone has ever seen happen at the same time on a baseball field happened. Was he perfect in this series? No, I don't think so. But if the reason for firing him is that they want to find someone who can get them over the hump and go to the postseason, well, if you hire a rookie manager, what evidence do you have that that's going to happen? That doesn't make any sense to me. If you're trying to find a scapegoat, as a general manager in Rizzo, he's trying to find a scapegoat for choices that he didn't make or mistakes he's made putting together an extremely good team, I don't think anybody would take that away from him. Then I think that Dusty got the short end of the stick. Now, we can debate that forever, but it'll be very interesting to see who they pick and how they manage that team. Jason Worth is certainly not going to be back. You would certainly not think so anyway. And they still need to figure out what they're going to do with their bullpen and how they're going to weather the storm if Bryce Harper does leave. In terms of John Farrell, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think anybody ever believed that John Farrell was a good manager. He had a wealth of talent thrown at his feet. He did well with it. There were certainly things that the team was lacking. But, I mean, the biggest thing that the Red Sox missed this year was David Ortiz. And that wasn't anybody's fault. He just retired. They have a fantastic crop of young guys, and now they need a big stick in the lineup to make it go. We've talked about WAR and how it fits, and I've said to you many times, I think it is unrealistic to look at that. I don't think that makes any sense because a guy like Scott Brocious, for example, can do wonders in Yankee Stadium in that lineup where he's batting eighth or ninth, as opposed to Oakland where he's batting third or fourth. It's not just the individual player, it's the lineup that's around you and how you fit and interact with it. And you've got a lot of guys with a lot of talent, but they needed a big stick to put fear in other teams' minds when they faced them. And they had certainly enough to get through the regular season. They didn't have enough in the postseason. Now, is that Farrell's fault? I think you can find a stronger manager to keep the team together. I think that's probably fair. But I think it's pretty tough. It's a tough sell to get rid of a guy who won a World Series and won back-to-back division titles. I certainly would hear the argument if they say, hey, the Yankees are coming. They went deeper than anybody expected, and this team has all the chance in the world and opportunity to get better, and they've got plenty of money to sign a Manny Machado or a Bryce Harper or Nick to pick a guy a year or two. So I would certainly say that both Farrell and Baker got raw deals going out after each of them winning back-to-back division titles, even going out early in the postseason.
He is Alan McCallum. He is our resident baseball guy around here, and I know we have not shoehorned any Orioles into this, but a little Sox, a little bit of Nationals, certainly a lot of Dodgers and Astros. We'll have that going on this week. Alan, what's the first shoe that drops on the Orioles? Not far out. What are you expecting to happen here anytime soon? And these Buck Showalter to the rumors that that kicked around for. First off, I don't, and I think every fan in the know sort of understands this is going to sort of lay the groundwork for the next 5 years, right?
Yeah, sure. Look, I find it hard to believe that Buck would end up in Philly in the next season because we've seen how Peter Angelos protects the contracts that he has, and if he's not going to if Buck resigns after his contract is up, not necessarily. So we'll see what the Phillies organization goes with in the long term. You asked me what they're going to do in the short run, and I don't know, Nestor, because but I don't know. I certainly don't think. I would be shocked to see any significant starting pitching come in within the winter meetings or in general.
And again, it's fascinating. Darvish is out there throwing, was available. Verlander was available. Not cheap. I mean, choice. I mean, that's what you get when you have guys that are going to pitch Game 2 and Game 3 of the World Series for you. But, the Orioles had no firepower to even, chance Cisco types to be getting those kind of players, nor should they be chasing them. But But should they or should they not? I mean, without them, you can't win, right? Without that kind of pitching, they're not going to compete with the likes of the Dodgers and certainly not the likes of the Yankees and the Red Sox in their own division.
Sure. So the Orioles, in theory, could have gotten those players because they do have a nice layer of prospects, maybe not top prospects, but certainly intriguing prospects. And you mentioned Francisco, and we saw a couple of them towards the end of the season. But the problem is if they let that layer go, then they have nothing. So, I mean, and this is an organization that just likely is not going to spend the way they can, and we would certainly hope they would. Now, in terms of the 2017 season, if they had gotten a Justin Verlander or a Yu Darvish, it certainly would have been better than Jeremy Hellickson, but it wouldn't have put them over the top. I mean, the way the team collapsed in September, as I said to you in July, they don't need one pitcher or two. They needed four for the starting rotation. They might have finished, I don't know, one or two games under 500, but it wouldn't have made the difference to get them to the postseason. And I'll say to you what I said to you in July and what I said at the end of the season, that to look at the team that they had on the field and the starting pitching they were throwing out there every day, and look and say, even if some miracle happens and we can get to the wild card game, that there's any chance that we can compete with the likes of the Indians or the Astros, or even the Yankees, who just absolutely pulverized the Orioles through the 2017 season. I said to a guy last night while we were watching the celebration with the Astros that if Aaron Judge had never had an at-bat against the Orioles in 2017, he would have finished with 35 home runs. I mean, he not only did he crush them, but he would get hot after playing them and be hot for a while. To look at that pitching and look at the kind of club they had and believe that they could compete against the best teams to get to the World Series or at least the ALCS, it was just ludicrous. He certainly has, and Duquette has a lot of work to do. I can't tell you what he's going to do. What would I like to see him do? It's probably unrealistic to think you can trade both. And of the two, moving Chris Davis is probably next to impossible. But Trumbo has the kind of contract and the kind of track record that I think that he could try and move. And I think that they would be better off to try and do that, to open up spots for some of their young guys, to free up some salary. Maybe in the process of trading him, you can find a piece of the pitching puzzle. What that is, I wouldn't know. I have no illusions that they're going to bid on Yu Darvish or some of the couple other elite pitchers out there. But there's certainly moves to be made. There's certainly things to be done. It seems to be the case that he moves very slowly and likes to pick from the back end of the market, and that's how we got saddled with the Ubaldo Jimenez's of the world.
Well, the question then would be, like on opening day, is Wade Miley really being mentioned here? Is Chris Tillman really being mentioned here? Are they going to sell me Tyler Wright or or Wilson? Or, bringing up these names again. I know I got that confused. I did that not on purpose, but it's funnier that way.
You could put those two guys.
Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Hell no, and it ain't over now. No, I really do wonder what the names are going to be that are penciled in for the 4 or 5 spots. And I'm sure Buck's wondering the same thing, quite frankly, as he's in his walk year and rumors abound that he doesn't really want to be here anymore.
I certainly think Tillman. I think it's very likely Tillman will be back. I think that they are going to hope that he can rebound and that he'll give them the kind of pillow contract and see if it works out. The problem is that if Tillman's trying to up his worth to try and do that in Camden Yards is a kind of a crazy thing to do. But he knows the organization, he knows pitching here, and they'll be kinder to him than a lot of other teams would be. So it would not surprise me at all to see Tillman. I don't have any doubt Ubaldo Jimenez is throwing his last baseball for the Orioles. I am not as certain about that with Wade Miley simply because he's left-handed. And that's always the kind of thing that makes guys scratch their head and say, I can fix him.
You bring up a great point there. He's left-handed. We got to have him. Right? Yeah, sure. So Scott McGregor, but he's not going to be in the rotation this year. So.
And the reality is he's going to be out there for a little while, unless something magical happens. So if Duquette waits till the last minute, he might be the best option he has, which is a terrifying thought, but certainly possible. I think he's going to give opportunities to a couple of the young guys that they have in the organization, whether they were up here already and pitched out of the bullpen, well, not well, but they believe might have a future. I think that they're going to try and find some guys that did well at the sort of the AAA level to bring in again, and maybe they make one deal for sort of a mid-level pitcher, maybe a little above Miguel Gonzalez, for example, but certainly not a Justin Verlander or Yu Darvish, to try and recreate this rotation. Is that going to do what needs to get done? No, probably not. So at that point, what you're really counting on are a couple of the young guys to push forward, which honestly means that it's more likely that they'll reemerge as a force in 2019 as opposed to 2018. And at that point, we'll know by then, I guess, the future of Manny Machado and what the rest of the organization looks like. That may not be a terrible thing, just in the sense that they do have some young guys. They do have some contracts that they need to move. I'll tell you what, I mean, one of the interesting things is what they're going to do at shortstop. I think if you are really trying to solve the pitching piece, here's something I would do, and maybe Duquette will do. Tim Beckham had the best 5 weeks of his life in the summer. Slowed down horribly in September, but had a really eye-popping.
Yeah, he played like the #1 overall draft pick in the Major League Baseball draft. Yes,
right.
Correct.
Do I believe that he's a 300 hitter?
No.
No. Do I believe that he's a guy that could hit 255 to 260 and hit 20 home runs at Camden Yards a year? Yeah. The question is his defense strong enough to balance that out? I think that this is the best moment you will ever have to trade Tim Beckham and get something, not 5 pieces, but maybe one good piece back for him. And that's a move I would absolutely try to make. And I would try to move one of the big sluggers, whether it be Trumbo or Davis, and it would probably be Trumbo, and a separate deal. Again, to move the salary, maybe to get a small piece back.
I think you're asking for a lot there if you think that's going to happen. I mean, that there's going to be a real return on that, right?
I'm not saying there's going to be a real return. What I'm talking more about is moving salary and opening a spot and breaking up the strikeout, not walking huge strikeout tandem that really hampered this club through most of the season. And giving a couple of young guys, whether it be Austin Hayes or Cedric Mullins, or DHing Chance Cisco a little more, or bringing back a Pedro Alvarez, who I still believe is a guy that could really help this club in the middle of the lineup, an opportunity to play here. So there are a few things that could happen. Of all the things, I would say that moving Tim Beckham right now would probably be the strongest move. If they're not going to move Manny Machado, and I think we all know they're not going to in the off season, then trying to get.
Yeah, that would be the shocker of all shockers if they do something shocking, right? Like they don't do anything like that. Big trades, moving pieces around. You can count on it. I mean, Duquette and Buck both have contracts. They're going to be here. Manny Machado has a contract. He's going to be here. Zach Britton, they'll be afraid to deal him in the offseason, right? I mean, they just will be, right? And the other part of this is they really will spend the entire offseason believing that they're going to somehow win 91 games next year. Like, right? They will convince themselves of that every day that they're in this thing next year.
And the platform from which you launched that idea is that, well, we've done it before. And
fair enough. And they have.
And they have. But the team was younger. The core was stronger. Whether it be J.J. Hardy and Chris Davis, Adam Jones being a little bit younger. This team is different. I mean, Chris Tillman was shockingly, as far as I'm concerned, better than I ever expected him to be. They got more out of Miguel Gonzalez and Wei Yin Chen than anybody would have imagined because nobody knew who they were. And I mean, you think about it, Ness. I mean, 2014, Tillman, Gonzalez, and Chen were the anchors of that team. And frankly, from 2012 to basically 2015, they were the anchors of that rotation. And for all intents and purposes, all three of those guys are gone. And they have not replaced them with the kind of, let's say, savvy. People would say that the two guys that you're looking to have more talent than those players, and that's probably true. But there was a savvy about Miguel Gonzalez. It was clear he knew how to pitch. Wei Chen, I would say the same, and being left-handed didn't hurt him. And Chris Tillman, certainly, if not being a number one starter, played a good version of one on TV. And those guys really anchored this, and all of them are gone. And if they don't find a strong replacement for at least two of them, if not three, going into this coming season, then it's going to be a long year for them. And it certainly seems like this is going to happen, though it's hard.
It already feels like a long year, and that year hadn't started yet.
It's not hard to imagine. It's just hard to fathom, if you follow me, that they would let Manny Machado and Zach Britton walk in free agency without doing anything to get something for them. I'm not saying I don't know that is a likely scenario. It's just hard from the knowledge that I have, and nobody's ever paid me to run a baseball team. But I know if you're that close to free agency with those two difference-making players, and you don't believe you're going to give them the kind of offers that'll keep them, and I guess the Orioles, we'll see what happens. Maybe they'll surprise us. But if you don't believe that, you got to trade them. Period. And we'll see what happens. Both of them had knocks against them in this season that you could argue, well, it wasn't the right time to trade them. And I could argue the other side of it. I'll say again, Manny had made a season out of 6 really good weeks after the All-Star break, and Zach was never quite right, although as closers go, I mean, he still was certainly among the upper echelon, even with being injured. I mean, he blew two saves, I think, but when he was in there, he certainly was effective. But you just have to move those guys. You have to move them to get something if you don't believe your bids are going to be competitive. And frankly, even if they are, that doesn't mean they want to be here. Certainly, I mean, everybody believes Manny is his nickname is Mr. Miami, right? So, I don't know. We'll see. And look, I don't know Buck well. I don't know Buck to tell you where his mind is. Probably nobody does. But I think we know that there's enough smoke to be concerned about whether or not he thinks being here.
Well, just the fact that that's running around on the street right now is not good for anybody. It's not a good look for anybody.
Right. And as this, again, he's been here with this core, with Davis and Jones and Hardy, and then Machado came and Wieters.
Well, in a lot of ways, it feels like the ship has sailed. And watching the Yankees play the last 2 weeks and watching the Red Sox, fire a manager after winning the division, you start to see where the level of expectation is in other places.
And those are two young teams that have done what they needed to do to reinvent themselves. And the Orioles are looking like a formerly young team that's getting older, and they don't have an idea how to do that. And that is not a good play. That's how you start 14 losing seasons again. And that I certainly wouldn't wish that on them or this fan base. But we've talked about it through the whole season that this was a critical season to make those kinds of decisions, and the last gasp for it gasps are coming both in this winter and at the very last moment, sort of the trade deadline of 2018. And certainly by then we'll know what the story is for that team, whether or not they're truly have the chance to compete or not. And that's going to hinge on what kind of pitching to get consigned in the next 2.5 months.
All right. Well, Alan has been a wonderful diversion from me having to talk about the Ravens and the Vikings, and certainly the Ravens and the Dolphins. We'll be talking plenty about that in the coming days leading up to Thursday night, and of course a long weekend after that, and then the preparation for Nashville begins next week. But certainly the Dolphins on tap, and the World Series here. Los Angeles Dodgers and the Houston Astros amidst nice weather, good pitching, good baseball, weird National League versus National League sort of roots here, but we'll be watching each and every night as the World Series unfolds with, I don't know that there's a bad guy in this World Series. You certainly root against the Dodgers if, as Coach Billick would say, have at that, but it's been 30 years for them as well, and both of these organizations were incredibly classy to me on the baseball tour, so I have nothing but fond thoughts for both of them. I'll be wearing my Dodger hat, I'm sure, before the week is over. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. Alan McCallum can be reached, Alan at WNST.net. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.